Hello, this is Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman of Columbia University speaking to you today for Medscape. This video blog is going to be the first in a series of commentaries that I'm going to call A Piece of My Mind, and the series is inspired by my observations and concerns about events that are ongoing that fly in the face of reason and knowledge, seem unhealthy, and detrimental to our society. They pertain to mental health and the practice of psychiatry and mental illness and stigma and all the things that we usually want to educate ourselves about. But increasingly, it's important for us to have some voice in the public arena about what is going on in our country, particularly because of the fact that we've seen in recent years the fact that we can't rely on the institutions of our government to always protect us. Now, as psychiatrists, we're uniquely qualified to recognize and call attention to pathologic behavior. In people, we call them patients, but also in populations and societies. And it's fitting that this first installment of A Piece of My Mind focuses on issues with which we've been consumed in the past year, and I'm referring to the presidential election and the COVID-19 pandemic. If there ever was a time comparable to this in the past year, I don't know it. And we've all worn out the hackneyed expression of this is an unprecedented experience we're going through. But it's not just one crisis. It's a series of crises that we've gone through. The COVID pandemic being the first, but then there were the racial incidents of abuse and social unrest. There's the economic disruption that has been occurring and will continue to occur, the contentious presidential election, and the symbolically poignant death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which stood in contrast to the events that have gone before. Now, among the good things that recently occurred is the advent of the vaccines, which signal the possible end to this dark period that we've gone through. However, rather than celebrating the arrival of the scientifically engineered solution to our problem, we find ourselves engaged in a battle for public opinion. As a result, we now find ourselves in a two-front war. Now, war is an apt metaphor for our situation. Since last March, we've been battling the COVID virus and the conflagration that it sparked. This has been an injurious and deadly battle through the direct effects of causing sickness and death, but also the collateral effects that the virus has had on family members who have lost loved ones, the overburdened stress that it's caused to healthcare workers, and also the social and economic disruption that's changing people's lives, closing their businesses, causing them to be destitute. And that's causing a lasting impact on our population. But in addition to the virus and the pandemic that it's incited and its disruptive effects rippling through our country, we have also become embroiled in a second conflict, the second front of this war, one of civil strife over how we regard the pandemic and what we should do to combat it, and how the vaccine, which recently arrived, should be regarded. This added to the conflict has caused a two-front war in which we're battling the virus, but we're also battling ourselves. It's not quite a circular firing squad, but it's a civil conflict, almost like the Civil War, where we're divided and opposing ourselves in terms of how we should deal with this national threat. And it's an intensely felt division over how to cope with the problem, and it's a manifestation, apparently, of the political divide which we're riven by. So this is reflected in our recent election and in the contentious aftermath. Now, in terms of this civil strife, the national divide, which seems to be a manifestation of the political differences that are intensely dividing our country, I have to say I can't understand this. I don't see a rational explanation, but it seems to be a manifestation of some very pernicious dynamic that has invaded our national psyche. If you'll permit me to give you two illustrations. Now, based on what's happened in the context of the pandemic and what we know from disaster psychiatry, studying the effects on people from past disasters, human-made or natural, we can estimate what the increments are going to be in different types of diagnostic conditions or mental health conditions in people. who's going to develop depression, anxiety, succumb to substance abuse, or may be impelled to suicide, or may become violent, domestic, or criminal as a result of the factors caused by the pandemic. We can predict what these will be within certain confidence intervals in terms of the increases in population frequencies. Now, based on this modeling, we could potentially enact public mental health initiatives to try to preempt the sequelae of these or to mitigate them. Now, we should be doing this, but we're not. There's a consensus that there's going to be a price to pay in the aftermath of the pandemic on the psychiatric side, but there's no action being taken to take steps to mitigate it. So that's one side of this. But the other side, the war we're fighting, besides the virus and the psychiatric sequelae to come, is the fact that we have a population divide, the result of what's being told to us, on one hand, by the best and the brightest of our infectious disease and public health scientists and experts, who are telling us how to contend with the virus, how long it's going to be with us, and when it will be eradicated by the vaccines and we can plan to normalize. So we're getting guidance from people that we'd ordinarily rely on and trust and accept the word of. If we had chest pain and we went to the hospital, they said we're having a heart attack. If we had a lump and thought it might be cancer, if we had fell and had pain in our leg and wanted to find out if it was a broken bone, we would accept this unquestioningly. But now we're not. And we aren't following the advice, whether it's protective procedures, masks, distancing, not congregating, disinfection. Some people are following it religiously, but other people aren't. And it's an amazingly large number of people who aren't, and who are not just not following it, but they're rebelling against it, and they're even encouraging other people not to follow the advice. What is this? People exercising their individual freedoms, their freedom of speech, their self-determination? Give me a break. The notion that people have freedoms which empower them to ignore the certainties of science and the realities of data, and in doing so countermanding the public good and national interest to satisfy their own personal whims, is completely crap. And Samuel Johnson said that patriotism is the first refuge of scoundrels. Well, in this case, we see large numbers of people using the American ethos of rugged individualism, self-determination, don't tread on me, to basically mean I'm going to do whatever I want, and you can't tell me what to do, even if it's the right thing and the necessary thing. Wearing a mask is bad. Don't tell me I can't eat inside in a restaurant. Don't tell me I can't get together with whoever I want and have a party. This is nothing more than puerile narcissism. I guarantee you that if, instead of the COVID virus, which takes days to produce symptoms and not everybody is severely incapacitated or dies from it, but if this was Ebola, or this was nuclear fallout that was in the atmosphere, so that if you went outside immediately became sick or died, there wouldn't be any question about this. Nobody would be bitching. But because you can't see an effect immediately, and you have to use an intellectual process to understand what experts are telling you and follow their advice, but because you're being egged on by certain government officials and political elements, too many people are ignoring it. And they're feeling, if I can't see it and I don't feel it, then it's not real. And they're taking a contrarian position that's jeopardizing the nation's health and well-being. Well, that's just abominable. It's unacceptable. And we, all Americans, have to be embarrassed by what's happening. Things weren't bad enough with the pandemic and the destruction that it's causing. And now we're going to have to pick ourselves up in the aftermath. But we're prolonging this agony, this national nightmare, by fighting among ourselves about how we should deal with it. And this is leading to worsening of the problem. It's self-defeating. It defies reason. From a clinical, macro, psychologic perspective, what is happening is a regression of our national psyche to a state of greater immaturity, a more primitive, childlike level. We're a young country compared to the Europe and Asia, but we had become, in our 250 plus years, a beacon of freedom and enlightenment to the rest of the world. Instead, what we've now done is reverse direction and are devolving into a petulant, self-consumed adolescent mentality. I can only hope this is a temporary blip from which we're going to recover and not continue on a regressive trajectory which leaves the greatest country in the history of the world on a course where it devolves into a once great civilization gone bad and comes apart at its seams. But rights itself and continues on a course that fulfills our great national destiny as the most successful country in the history of the world. Winston Churchill, who has many quotable quotes, once said, "You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else." I pray that he was right in this case. Thank you for listening. This is Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, Columbia University, speaking to you today from Medscape.